So, good morning, everyone. I'm sure you're all probably familiar with the global flood in the Bible. Probably had in several of your classes. So, we're going to go over some of the key points of the flood. Things that really are you don't necessarily think about, but they're really important. Then quick overview of the timeline of the flood. And then we're going to go over some details about Noah's Ark, as well as why it's actually possible they could have been built, and some evidence for the flood. So what you've had in the past is more the Bible description of what's going on during the flood. But we're going to go through some actual details showing why we believe, well, not necessarily why we believe, but evidence showing that it could have actually happened. So, a few key points. Genesis flood was a global flood. That's a catastrophic event. Some people try to claim that it may not have actually been global, it's just local floods or floods experienced by different nationalities or regions, and they just have stories because it was a major flood. But according to the Bible, and what we believe, it was a global flood that lasted about a year. God, through Noah and the ark, God allowed all land-bound life to be saved. We had at least one pair of each animal. We'll discuss that a little more later. We have geological formations that show evidence of the flood. And then we also have plate tectonic movements. We have models that show it could have been possible for a flood to cause our world to be as it is today with continents. So, brief timeline. We had initiation. We know the flood happened because man had become corrupt and evil in the eyes of the Lord. And so he basically had Noah build the ark long before the actual flood occurred. But after it happened, we had rain for 40 days until we have enough water that we're actually covering the mountains. And it finally starts to subside, tops of the mountains are visible, and at this point Noah starts actually sending out birds to try to find signs of land. And eventually the water completely recedes, the land is dry, and Noah is allowed to leave the ark. So that's what we know from the Bible. So, first big point here is Noah's Ark itself. We don't have a whole lot of details as far as the exact dimension, or well, not dimension, exact structure, but we have an idea of what types of boats, as well as the overall dimensions. So, what we're given are actually cubits. So, a length of 300 cubits, breadth of 50, and height of 30. So, cubits are a little funny. They're kind of like our measurement of feet. Once upon a time, you could get feet just by marking it out, walking. But whose feet here is actually 1 foot? No one's foot's the same, right? Same problem with a cubit. A cubit is a measurement from your elbow to the tips of your fingers. So, one person's, that's not the same for people either. So, the exact dimensions in modern measurements may vary a little depending on what source you see. But generally speaking, we assume 18 inches. That means that it's about 150 yards. Who likes football?
The guys don't like football?
Who well, fine, we'll make it a little, we'll back it up a little. Who's seen a football field before? Been on one. All right. So the arc is 1.5 football fields long and a quarter of a football field wide. It's fairly massive. And that's on the upper range of what you can generally expect from what we've seen on wooden ships. We have had larger ships built since then, but they've all been metal, I think. It was also made of gopher wood. We don't actually know exactly what type of tree that is. It's just, that's the description we give with pitch, or cars, the pitch. And passengers. We had 8 humans for passengers. That's Noah and his wife, plus their 3 sons and their wives. We also had 2 land animals of each kind. So that was to make sure all the kinds survived. And we actually had some additional animals that I don't usually hear about. We had 7 pairs of each flying animal and 7 pairs of clean animals. So the clean animals were most likely so they could be a sacrifice after the flood. So you can actually see here, again, we don't necessarily have all the details, but this is what other creationists have envisioned the ark would have looked like on the inside. So they actually have the animal storage on the bottom. Then we have food. And then we have a lot of the family stuff and what the humans would have used. And again, just think about a ship it's at least 3 stories tall here. So if you actually want to see something like this in real life, you can actually go and see the Noah's Ark encounter in Kentucky. And it's actually fairly impressive just how large it is. So, moving on to kinds. This is actually one of the big starting points where people argue the ark couldn't have been big enough, even though how large it is. So, their argument is there's way too many types of animals to actually fit them all in one boat or one ship. So the key here is that we're only looking at animal kinds. If we're only looking at kinds, then there should be plenty of room for all the animal kinds. So what is a kind? Basically, it's animals that are similar genetically, and generally they are able to interbreed. So for those who reach this level in science class of classifications, that's kind of the family level. So examples are Felidae, that's cats. Canidae, which are canines, and Ursidae, which are bears. And the variation between the different types of bears, different types of dogs, that's just genetic variation, all within one kind. So this is just an example of a kind. This is the canine subfamily, which is a member of Canidae. So you only needed two animals to get all of the animals in the present day. So this point in the center is going to be the origin of all of them. And so the key point here is there's a single origin for all the different kinds, or all the different dogs in this one kind. So, catastrophic plate tectonics. Is anyone actually familiar with plate tectonics? No? Okay. So, our continents and the sea floor sit on what are known as tectonic plates. Today, these all move at a fairly slow rate. And you can actually, evidence of these is earthquakes. So whenever these plates actually rub against one another or shift, you can get earthquakes of varying sizes, just depending on how severe the movement is. Also, whenever they push against one another, you can actually have mountain ranges form. So all of the mountain ranges we have are where these plates intersect. So catastrophic plate tectonic is the theory that during the flood, we actually had these ocean plates moving very quickly rather than what we see today. A lot of theories about the age of the Earth are based on observations that we see today. They basically say, this is how it is today, that's how it should have always been. So if plate tectonics only move a few inches a year, they say they've always only moved a few inches a year. So in this case, we're saying that these plates actually move very quickly, which causes a lot of heat. And heat actually lowers the viscosity of fluids and materials, makes them much easier to conform. And that also means that you would end up moving faster. And that creates a runaway mechanism where it gets hotter, lower viscosity, move faster, hotter, and just cycles and cycles. And so in this way, we can actually go from what's known as the Pangea continent to the continents that we see today in a relatively short time frame. So this is an animation. It's supposed to, there it goes. Showing the movement of them. And you can see here, it's only taking 126-ish days to go from the initial one where it's all together to that much displacement away from Earth, based on the catastrophic plate tectonics. So, speaking of catastrophic, if something's catastrophic and there's something in it, what's often going to happen? What?
It's going to fall apart.
Yeah. It's going to be damaged or destroyed. Even ships of today, they get caught in storms, capsize or torn apart. So, Mark Horstmeyer actually built a 1/200 replica of the Ark. And his kids were actually attending here at the time, but he had them get out in the swimming pool with big paddles, creating waves. So, based on what they were doing, they were getting scale waves of over 500 feet. And regardless of that, the ship didn't get turned over or it didn't capsize. So they would have definitely probably been jostled, but the ship itself would have been okay. He also did finite element simulations based off this model. And so keep in mind that these movements are greatly exaggerated so you can actually see them. But in the pitch motion, you can see that it moves at that. Then you have it moving sideways in the yaw movement. And then torsion is twisting like this. So it does have it does have movement, but it's very small comparatively. And that's going to be true for pretty much any structure you have. Even buildings, they actually plan for them to move some, because if they make them completely rigid, it's going to create a lot more stress, and it's going to actually fail faster than it would if it can move some. So that's all things that are just theoretical. We're looking at, hey, these are observations that we know, these are things we can try to test. But what's actual evidence for the flood that we can observe today? So I'm going to preface this by a lot of these things, if you are looking at secular viewpoints, you have to consider their bias or their viewpoint. Because we're looking at this from a creation viewpoint, whereas they're looking at it from a viewpoint saying the world must be millions of years old, or billions. So the first is layering in the geographical structure. So what does secular science say as far as where structure, or the layers in the geology come from? Anyone?
Lots of years. And
Y'all being really quiet on me.
Y'all know this stuff. Come on, I talk them all.
oh, well.
All right. So yes, the secular theory is that we have billions of years of accumulation. It has the lowest layer, and then we have time passes as it builds up, and something changes, creates a new layer, new layer, new layer. And so that's both how they try to classify time and how they classify what's in the layer, the age of it, along with radiometric dating. So that's not the only way that we can have that though. This video will actually see that just going from having a mixed media, or not mixed rocks and sand can actually aggregate on its own without any external force and in a short time.
In the air, the settling cone displays all the features of lamination through repetitive segregation. Moreover, the laminae thickness increases with the feeding rate of the sediment mixture. It should be noted that laminae form in the direction of motion, here at an angle exceeding 30 degrees. Given the absolute vacuum is at minus 29.92 inches of mercury, the hypothesis of turbulence is tested near complete vacuum at minus 22 inches of mercury. Lamination develops without the presence of a surrounding fluid. Lamination therefore depends on the mechanical interaction between particles of different sizes, different shapes, and different densities.
So the important thing to keep in mind here is it's not taking a long time to form sedimentation or make these layers, the laminar layers. It's happening purely based on the shapes and what's in it. So the idea here where the secular is saying these are things that just happen over a long period of time. If you actually have a flood where everything gets torn out of the ground, everything's been destroyed, and then you have soot, as well as sand, dirt, trees, vegetation, bark. You're going to have a lot of different things just floating in the water. And as that drains down and evaporates, you're going to have these naturally forming the layers that we see today, as opposed to a long time scale. Additionally, in a lot of deposits, we actually see these striations these are not something you would expect to see from a long time scale gradual accumulation. It's something you would expect from fast moving water or some other dynamic effect. So, next we have fossils. What happens when something dies? Ignoring preservation techniques. We're not freezing them, we're not using formaldehyde. What happens to a body or a plant? Yeah, they decompose. And it happens relatively quickly. So, that's even more true for very fragile structures like bugs. So, if we were just going through natural animals dying, slowly building up over time, most things we would just expect them to decay and fall apart, especially things like bugs. And I know Mr. Whitbeck particularly likes this photo of the fish actually being fossilized while it's eating another fish. How would that happen? Well, what the idea of the flood is, this catastrophic event, many things were just instantly buried. And so, once it gets buried, it's actually in a place where bacteria can't get to it. It's contained, and you end up getting the fossil that we would expect to see. So, those are things that are much longer time scale. They can be difficult to test. So, has anyone heard Mount St. Helens? Might be a little too old for most of you. So, this was a volcano. Or, well, it is a volcano. It's still there. But it actually erupted on May 18, 1980. That's the most recent eruption. But what's really key here is when it did erupt, it actually had a huge portion of the side here that just kind of fell off. It's the largest landslide in recorded history, or on record. And devastated approximately 230 square miles. So you can actually see they're miles away here from this picture viewpoint. And even all the way over here, the trees and everything are gone. So, the cool thing about this though, is this was a catastrophic event in this local area. And so, things that we normally can't actually observe, or this allowed us to actually observe them. So, and that means that we actually have evidence for a lot of things that we normally try to talk about. So, one, scientists talk about, we've been talking about the slow, gradual buildup over time. And one of the things that they talk about with that are these trees, that you find them standing up rather than something falling down and just laying there and building up over time. We've actually observed places where trees have been completely buried vertically, and they often are missing the root systems. So, one of the ongoing theories before was that this happened just over time and the roots degraded, less durable than the trees themselves. But with Mount St. Helens, we actually observed that all these trees, after they were knocked off where they were and they were sitting in the water, they were actually floating vertically. And then some of them actually sunk and were being buried in all the debris after the fact. So things that were thought to take millions of years happened in less, or I don't remember the exact time scale, but a few years. And keep in mind this happened in 1980. So that's less than 50 years ago. And most of this happened even long before that. Sedimentation of park beads. So one of the ways that main ways they say that coal is made, they say that a swamp just slowly heats up over time. But with Mount St. Helens, these layers of ash and peat, I think this happened in less than a day. Canyon formations. I'm sure everyone's heard that the Grand Canyon was supposed to occur over a large extended time just from a river flowing through it, right? Mount St. Helens erupted, all the debris and water, it instantly formed canyons around the area. Radiometric dating. I don't think we really cover that in any of our talks. Someone else may cover. But radiometric dating is where you take certain elements and you test them to see how much they've decayed over time. And they try to say this rock or person or fossil or whatever is a certain date based on how much element is left. But they tested some of the rocks that formed after this eruption. And even though we know these rocks are years old, let's say less than decades now, decades now, they're showing up as millions of years old. And then animal recovery. Expectation is that animals wouldn't be able to survive in this area for a long time, that the local populations would be slow. But instead, we see that the populations actually exploded. And even though all the animals were wiped out in that local area, it was repopulated fairly quickly. So that's the general idea. These are a lot of broad overview ideas. So we have Noah's Ark can be built. There's plausible fast-acting mechanisms that could explain the flood. Noah's Ark could have actually survived the flood. And then we have multiple ways that we can see that there's evidence that we could say are a result from the flood. And again, depending on your background, is going to determine how you look at that evidence. So, but if anyone has more interest in any of these topics, we have additional materials that we can either point you to or potentially share. So just contact us at sacs.msa@gmail.com. And next week will be Evidence of Young Earth by Dr. Sunkwama. So does anyone have questions?